Okay, this is going to be a video on drawing an eye in front view. So these are both photos of my eye. I'm going to use this one where my expression is smiling. You can see that the expression does change the eye shape a little bit. Since there are a lot of tutorials out there on just kind of a basic eye, I thought I'd do this one smiling. First thing I want to do is kind of an underdrawing. If you're doing this as part of a larger portrait, you would already have kind of a shape like this for the eye, and then you would have next to that maybe something like this, and maybe something like this. So this is the eyebrow, this is the side of the nose here where it connects up to the brow bone. And in my example that I did earlier, we kind of completed our eyebrow shape with kind of an oval and a triangle. Notice how this is kind of at an angle from here, and there's lots of space. There's space almost enough for another eye in here as well. And we have this arch of the eyebrow about even with the end of the eye itself. All right. So now we're ready to go over this with some of the details. First thing I'm going to do is notice the shape of the opening and the shape of the lid. So I'm going to start with the shape of the opening of the eye. I like to make this a little bit exaggerated, a little bit less curvy, using more straight lines than people often use when they're starting an eye, to kind of counteract making it too curvy. So you can start this with straight lines, and then you can kind of curve them into each other a little bit, or just kind of make them semi-straight, semi-curvy. All right, then we're going to do the lid. So again, we're looking at how much space there is. And this will now kind of take me to kind of filling that eye shape and that space that we had. So we're using both the lid and the eye opening to get there. So I'm noticing a little bit more height or space here. And I'm not connecting this line back to the eye there because it doesn't connect. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lay in the iris. And I recommend drawing the iris so that it sits on top of that lower lid rather than going under it. And if we were to draw the full circle, the upper part would be up here, overlapped or underneath the eyelid. So you might draw this kind of coming under a little bit, the lower lid too, but make sure that it's more overlapped by the upper lid. If you make it too even, it tends to look a little off. All right, I'm going to go ahead and draw in a circle for the pupil. I'm also going to draw in one or more highlights. So in this example, I've got 2 highlights. So I'm going to draw those back in, both in. They may be overlapping with the pupil or just the iris. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give a little more shape to this eyebrow. So you often have this kind of shape here, kind of the introduction of the eyebrow, so a little larger, and that's attaching to, connecting to this eye or this line of the nose. And I'm going to round that out a little bit more and bring that down. And then over here as well, I could change the shape a little bit just depending on the brow that you're looking at, thinner, thicker, what have you. This will pretty much do. Might be a little straighter than my eyebrow. Mine kind of curves down that way more, but this works. This is an acceptable eyebrow. All right, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to get in some of these details of the lower lid. So notice that with the lower lid, we're going to see a line in here. So I'm going to erase the one I originally did to have two separate lines. And these do connect up to this line over here. So we're seeing the rim of this, kind of like when you're looking at a cylinder, when we're drawing the paper towel roll, you could kind of see that top rim. Same thing's happening here. So this is this front plane and this is this top plane. We're just seeing that rim there. We do want to get in a couple of these lines here. So 1, 2 lines in here is what I see. If you see something different, if you're drawing from your own eye in the mirror or a reference photo, you could alter that a little bit, but you'll have at least one in there. I might alter the shape of this a little bit if I see it a little bit differently. So I'm going to keep looking and making changes as I go. And then because I'm smiling, I'm going to see this lower lid defined a little bit more. So I'm just making a very light line like so. And then over here, I'm also going to put in a line that's going to be close to the eye like so. And what I'm basically doing is I'm kind of outlining this shadow in here in that cavity of the eye. And then down here, defining this bottom part of the eye socket. And then we also have this where the bridge of the nose is attaching to the cheek down here below the eye socket. All right, so now I have most of the parts of my eye. I am going to add a little bit of room for the eyelashes. So the eyelashes are basically a thick line in and of themselves, so they might overlap the eyeball a little bit more than I have them, or maybe they're overlapping the eyelid, the upper eyelid a little bit more. And then this line tapers out down here. So I've got this double line. Because I've thickened this, I might realize that I need to add maybe a little bit more, tiny bit more to my eyelid. Depending. All right, so just keep looking at the spaces and what you think they need. And I'm continuing to kind of look at the different parts of the eye and just make adjustments. So, and you can see I'm kind of adding the new lines that I want and then erasing the old ones. So just really, really subtle changes. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start adding some shading. So I might want to switch to a darker pencil. I've been using my standard number 2 pencil, or it would be an HB pencil. You can see actually this one says both number 2 and HB. All right, so maybe switch to a 2B or a 4B. And I'm going to have a little paper towel handy if I need to kind of prevent things from smearing. So the darkest part is going to be the pupil. So I can go ahead and shade that in. The pupil, of course, would change size depending on the light situation where you are, getting bigger if you're in a darker room. Another area that's going to be fairly dark would be this lash line. So I can shade that in. Notice I'm not adding the individual lashes at this point. We will save those details and that texture for last. All right, so other places we can add some extra shading. Definitely in here. So I'm going to shade along this eyelid line and coming out a little bit and up. So notice how I'm getting lighter as I move up, so using a gradation. And out here into this shadowed area as well. So I'm keeping my shading following the forms, and I'm using small marks. So if I have to switch directions like I did here, following this and then this, where they overlap, you're not going to see them clashing. So small marks are the key to that. All right, and around this side, we've got kind of a darker area here and then fading out with some shading over here as well. All right, and we're also going to be shading along this line over here. One thing I'm going to do, a lot of these areas that we started out with lines are going to end up, we don't want them to be hard lines. We want these to be kind of soft shaded areas. So I'm just going to shade along this space. So I'm kind of making an angle like so. So I'm replacing this line, in other words, with a shadow. Same thing in here. I'm going to shade in from this line, but I don't want this to be a heavy line here. And I can shade in from here, but I don't want this to be a heavy line. I'm kind of replacing these sharp lines with these soft shadowed areas. This area in here, I'm also going to shade lightly down from the brow, as well as shading lightly up from the eyelid here. And we can let this shadow touch, but it's definitely going to be lighter in this center area here. So, and I'm just following what I see and maybe exaggerating a little bit to know where these shadows are. Another area I'm going to need shade is going to be my eyebrow, but before I do that, I am taking out some of that underdrawing. I'm getting a little ahead of myself though. Let's go back into the iris. So I've got fairly light eyes. I've got gray-blue eyes, but they're still one of the darkest areas. So I am going to use a medium to dark pencil to shade in the iris. And I'm going to shade around those highlights. So kind of following the edge. So keeping my shading, those marks consistent, following the edges of the shape. And if you've messed up the circles, is a good time to kind of just modify it a little bit as you go. The other thing I want to do is I do want to make the shadow a little bit darker up here at the top and getting a little bit lighter because this top lid is creating a shadow onto the eye. You might also see it darker around the outside and getting lighter toward the center. And if the eye were brown or black, I would shade even darker, but still always remembering to leave open the highlights. And I'm making these highlights maybe even a little bit bigger than I see them, just to make sure that they show up, that they register. If you leave out the highlights or they're not, they don't look present enough, then the eye will look really dead. All right, let's see, what other areas? So I also need to shade the whites of the eye. So this eyeball is actually just that, it's a ball. So you can kind of see in here, these diagrams show how the eyeball is a literal sphere and it's kind of covered in part by the eyelid. And then you've got the iris on there. So the reason I'm saying all that and pointing that out is because we are going to shade, sorry, we were doing this one. We're going to shade this area because it is a rounded sphere. So the part that's farther from you would be these two corners. So we can start shading from the lash line going down because the eyelid and the eyelashes are casting a shadow, but also coming from the corner out. All right, and then the same thing over here. So we can shade in this area. I actually see a couple little highlights in there, so you could leave those, or you could go back in later and create some lighter parts. But other than those highlighted areas, this will be shaded. And then this part in here, again, one of the darker parts of the eyeball. And I'm just looking and seeing, oh, maybe the eye needs to be a little squintier than I've done it. So I can still kind of adjust things. So adding a little bit more to my lashes out here. We'll adjust this a little bit if it's looking a little bit not curvy enough. My angles are sticking out too much since I wanted to make it not too curvy before. But if I went overboard that direction, I can smooth some of those things out. If I need to have this part of the eye cover a little bit more to make it look like it's smiling, again, I can make that adjustment. So if I need to, I can even move this up just a little bit. So I'm just kind of comparing what I've already drawn to what I see in the photo and just making slight adjustments as I go. So it's pretty much almost never too late to make those revisions. And then I'm just moving up this lower part just a little bit. All right, so I've shaded this part in here. I might even shade a little bit more in here, coming in toward the eyeball. I'm also going to shade along this inner edge a little bit, depending on how the light is hitting. In this photo, I've got a little bit of the light, and you can see it here as well. So I don't want to shade all the way up to the edge. And in fact, I'm going to go back in and make sure that I open this up enough to have a little bit more highlight there. And then I'm going to shade along here. So if you've got this light line, I'm going to shade up from that. If your line is too heavy, you might need to erase that before adding the shading. So I'm shading up. So again, this is really like a shape that's coming out at you, so a curving shape. So we're essentially shading the under part of this like cylinder. So I'm bringing my shadow all the way out here. I'm even seeing it come down very lightly from the edge of the eyeball and kind of coming out here. So shading out here a bit as well into this area, coming up toward the eyebrow. All right, we're also going to add some shading onto the eyelid. So we're going to shade a little bit here, so not too dark. And then we're going to leave kind of this middle spot open. And even here, I can sort of leave this middle part of the eyelid lighter. So we've got this part curving down, and